Welcome to the deep dive. We're all about getting to the heart of complex topics, really understanding them without getting lost in the weeds. And today we're looking at something that's like essential to how we learn. It's about basically how we think about knowledge itself.
Exactly. What do we even consider knowledge? How do we know that we know something? That's what we call epistemic beliefs. But we're not just talking about this generally. We're going to look at how these beliefs actually change depending on the subject matter.
Right. So, like, how we view knowledge in history might be different from how we view knowledge in, say, physics.
Exactly. And the guide for our deep dive today is this fascinating article, Beliefs About Knowledge and Knowing. It's by Barbara K. Hoffer, and it's really a response to some other researchers, Mewes, Bendixson, and Harrell.
It's always interesting to see how different researchers kind of like build on each other's work. So this article is really our roadmap for understanding this whole area of educational psychology.
Absolutely. And I think our mission today is to really unpack, like, how our assumptions about knowledge change when we shift gears between different subjects. And, why should we even care?
Yeah, why is this important for the average person?
Well, because understanding this can actually make us better learners, and not just in school, but in life. It's about how we approach information in general.
Mm.
Okay, so the article jumps right into a debate that researchers have been having for a while. So this question of, is our understanding of knowledge kind of general?
So like a one-size-fits-all approach to knowledge.
Yeah, like the same basic principles apply no matter what you're learning. That's the idea of generality. Or, on the other hand, does our understanding of knowledge actually change drastically depending on what we're studying? That's specificity.
So is it like a universal set of rules for knowledge, or is it very specific to the subject matter?
Yeah, that's the heart of the debate.
Hmm.
And for a long time, researchers were kind of stuck in this either mindset.
It had to be one or the other.
Right. But I think the article does a good job of explaining how we've kind of moved past that. I mean, it's not as simple as black and white.
There's nuance, right?
Exactly. It's more like, how do both of these ideas, generality and specificity, actually work together?
It's kind of like asking, does a good meal depend more on the chef or the ingredients?
That's a great analogy
Yeah.
because obviously both matter. And, the article gives credit to Muse and his colleagues for really pushing the field forward, getting us past that sort of binary thinking.
Okay, so we're not just stuck in this either or debate anymore, but let's really dig into this idea of domain specificity, because I think it's crucial for understanding the rest of the article.
Yeah.
So when we say that our understanding of knowledge is specific to a certain domain, what are we actually talking about?
It's like saying each subject, each discipline, has its own unique knowledge ecosystem, right? So domain specificity basically means that history, economics, geology, they all have different rules of the game.
Different playbooks.
Exactly. So in history, what counts as solid evidence might be very different from what counts as solid evidence in, say, physics.
So like a primary source document versus the results of an experiment.
Right. Or, how you build a convincing argument in art history is totally different from how you build a convincing argument in economics. And even the structure of knowledge itself might look different across disciplines, like the way we organize and connect information in our heads.
And how certain can we even be about the answers we find? Is there always a definitive answer?
That's another key aspect of domain specificity. The article points out that even within the sciences, you see this variation. Like physics and chemistry, they often establish laws that are considered pretty much unshakable, right?
Yeah, like the law of gravity.
Right. But then you look at a field like psychology, and the answers are often much more tentative. It's more about probabilities, tendencies, ongoing revisions. Our understanding is always evolving.
It's like the difference between, say, a blueprint in engineering and a therapist's understanding of their client. The blueprint is much more fixed, right?
Exactly. So this idea of domain specificity isn't just like a hunch. The article mentions a whole bunch of studies that actually provide evidence for this.
So researchers have actually tested this idea.
Oh, yeah. And they've looked at it in a lot of different ways, like how people think about different subjects, but also how people think about different areas within the same subject. And the findings are pretty consistent. People do seem to recognize these different ways of knowing, these different rules of the game, across disciplines and even within them.
So there's a good amount of empirical support for this idea. But if it seems so clear, then why is studying domain specificity still a challenge for researchers? What are some of the big hurdles they're facing?
Well, one of the major challenges is, like, how do we actually measure these specific beliefs accurately? Like if you're trying to understand how someone thinks about evidence in history, a general survey about knowledge might not be sensitive enough.
Right, because it's not tailored to the nuances of historical thinking.
Exactly. It's like trying to measure a teaspoon of water with a gallon jug. The tool's just not designed for that level of precision.
We need more refined instruments.
We do. And then there's the issue of expertise. The article makes a really important point that students' beliefs about knowledge don't really start to look like those of experts until they're much further along in their education, typically in graduate school.
So someone who's just starting out in a field might have a very different view of knowledge than someone who's been immersed in it for years.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And that's a problem because a lot of the research on epistemic beliefs has been done with undergraduate students. So we might not have the full picture of how these beliefs develop as someone becomes a true expert.
So you need more research with, like, PhD students, professors, people who are really at the top of their field.
Exactly. And not just a snapshot in time. We need studies that follow people over time as they gain more and more expertise. The article calls these longitudinal studies.
So we can see the trajectory of how these beliefs change as someone becomes more knowledgeable.
Exactly. And, on top of all that, the article also makes this really crucial distinction between the actual nature of a discipline, like the inherent structure of knowledge in that field, and an individual's personal beliefs about that discipline.
Okay, I think we need to unpack that a bit. What's the difference there?
We'll take physics, for example. The way knowledge is structured in physics, the way they ask questions, the methods they use, that might be inherently different from, say, sociology.
Right.
That's just the nature of those disciplines.
Different tools for different jobs.
Right. But then you have someone who's a seasoned physicist who's been doing this for years. They're going to have a much more nuanced understanding of, like, the limits of physics, the uncertainties, the ongoing debates, more so than a first-year physics student or even someone in a totally different field. Their beliefs about physics are shaped by their deep engagement with it.
So it's not just about the subject matter itself, but also how much we know about it, how deep our understanding is.
Exactly. And that's a really important distinction, and it kind of ties into another point the article brings up, which is that some of the earlier research on domain specificity, the research that supposedly supported this idea, might have actually been looking at something slightly different.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean?
Well, they might have been looking at beliefs about specific subjects rather than actually testing whether our general beliefs about knowledge change across subjects.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Like, let's say a study finds that someone believes history is just about memorizing dates and names.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people have that misconception.
Right, but that's a belief about the nature of history. It's not actually telling us if their general belief about whether, knowledge is fixed or evolving changes when they switch from thinking about history to thinking about, say, math.
So it's not a direct measure of how their epistemic beliefs change across domains?
Exactly. And the article argues that both kinds of beliefs are important. Both our general views about knowledge and our specific views about particular subjects, they both influence how we learn.
They both play a role. And the article gives some really specific examples of these subject-specific beliefs, right?
Mhm.
Like in math, history, science.
Yeah, like believing every math problem has only one right answer, or that doing science is just about following a set of steps in a lab. These are all beliefs about specific subjects.
And the author suggests that, being more clear about the difference between these broader disciplinary perspectives and the more specific discipline-specific beliefs, this could be really valuable, especially when we're looking at things like how well students do in school, how they perform academically, and even in teacher education programs.
Yeah, if we really want to understand how beliefs impact learning, we need to be precise about what we're measuring.
We need the right tools for the job. Now, the article also brings up this concern about the methods used to study these beliefs in the first place. It calls for more methodological rigor. What are some of the issues there?
Well, as the field moved away from doing more in-depth interviews
Yeah.
and towards using more standardized questionnaires, there's this risk of losing some of the richness, the detail,
Like we're getting more data, but maybe sacrificing depth of understanding.
Yeah, exactly. And with these surveys, it's not always clear what students are actually thinking when they answer these questions, especially when you're asking them about pretty abstract ideas like the nature of knowledge.
Right, because it's one thing to answer a multiple choice question, but it's another thing to really articulate what you believe about something.
Exactly. And so the article recommends this technique called cognitive interviewing.
Which is,
It's basically talking to people as they're filling out the questionnaires to really understand, like, How are they interpreting these questions?
Mm.
Do they understand them in the way that the researchers intended?
So it's kind of like a reality check on the questionnaire itself.
Exactly. It helps make sure we're measuring what we think we're measuring. And it can help us refine those tools, those questionnaires, to be more accurate.
It's like making sure everyone's speaking the same language. Now, the article also talks about the philosophical side of all of this, and it mentions that, this whole study of epistemology, which is really the study of knowledge, has deep roots in philosophy. Why is it important to consider these philosophical foundations?
Well, because philosophy has been grappling with these questions about, like, what is knowledge? What is truth? What is justification? They've been wrestling with these fundamental questions for centuries.
So it's not just a new area of study.
Not at all. And understanding these core philosophical ideas, it gives us a richer framework for studying our own personal beliefs about knowledge.
It provides context.
Exactly. And it can help us clarify our concepts, build better models. And the article acknowledges the value of bringing these philosophical underpinnings into the conversation.
But it also suggests that there's even more room to make those connections stronger.
Yeah, like there's one particular model of epistemic beliefs that's discussed in the article, and they draw on some philosophical concepts to support it. But then the article points out that these concepts aren't always explicitly used when researchers are actually analyzing their data.
So there's this disconnect between the theory and the practice.
In a way, yeah. And then there's also this point that some of the studies included in the review, they look at things that might be a bit outside the traditional scope of epistemology, like
Mm.
beliefs about intelligence,
Yeah.
whether it's fixed or malleable, or how quickly someone can learn.
Right, so it's kind of blurring the lines a bit.
Yeah. And the article suggests that maybe keeping a clearer focus on the core concepts of epistemology would help strengthen the field.
Stay true to its roots. And the article also mentions the work of this philosopher, Royce,
Right.
right? His ideas about epistemology are referenced quite a bit. But then it raises this question of why not other influential thinkers, like Perry, for example?
Yeah, Perry's work has been hugely influential in education, especially in understanding how college students' thinking about knowledge and values evolves. And, the article sort of wonders why this emphasis on Royce? Why not bring in other perspectives? Like maybe there's a reason, maybe it's intentional, but it would be helpful to understand the rationale behind those choices.
Transparency is always good. Now, the article also spends some time talking about the language we use in this field, the terminology. And there's this one proposal to use the term availing instead of sophisticated to describe certain epistemic beliefs. What are the potential drawbacks of that change?
The issue is that calling a belief availing, which means like effective or beneficial, it implies that it's always a good thing.
Hmm.
But the reality is, whether a belief is helpful really depends on the context, right? It depends on the specific subject matter, the situation, the person's level of expertise. What's availing for a novice might not be availing for an expert, and vice versa.
Can you give us a concrete example of that?
Yeah, the article mentions this study with medical students, and they found that, the novice students, the ones who were just starting out, they often held these beliefs that seemed more, quote unquote, naive than the more advanced students.
Like they hadn't been exposed to enough yet to have more like nuanced beliefs.
Right, but the researchers argue that in those early stages of learning, having those seemingly naive beliefs might actually be beneficial. Like just accepting the authority of your instructors, taking in that basic medical knowledge as fact, it could actually be a productive way to build a foundation. So a belief that might look naive on the surface could actually be availing in that specific context.
It's like you need a certain level of trust in the beginning. You can't question everything right away.
Exactly. And the article also questions whether always trying to reduce recursion in beliefs is always a good thing.
And recursion is like
It's basically thinking about your own thinking.
metacognition.
Right. And sometimes that can be helpful. But the article suggests that sometimes having a more complex understanding of why we believe what we believe, that can be beneficial too. It's not always about simplifying everything.
It's about finding the right level of complexity for the situation. Now, the article also takes issue with this distinction that's sometimes made between, quote unquote, general epistemic beliefs and academic epistemology. What's the problem with that separation?
Well, the concern is that it kind of creates this artificial divide, like
Yeah.
general epistemic beliefs are the ones we develop outside of school, and then academic epistemology is what we learn in the classroom.
Separate spheres.
Right. But the article argues that that's not how it actually works.
Yeah.
Like, our understanding of how knowledge works in the real world, that absolutely influences how we approach learning in the classroom, and vice versa.
It's all interconnected.
Exactly. And it's not like we just leave our real world beliefs at the door when we walk into a classroom.
Right. And this actually brings us to a really important point, which is that epistemology isn't just this academic thing. It has real world implications, right? It affects how we operate in all areas of life.
Absolutely. Like, the article gives examples of how jurors reason in legal cases, how people debate social issues, how we evaluate information online, in the news, everywhere. Our beliefs about knowledge affect how we make decisions, how we form opinions, how we interact with the world.
So it's not just about passing tests, it's about navigating life.
Exactly. And the article argues pretty strongly against this idea of limiting this study of personal epistemology to just academic knowledge, because educators have a responsibility to, like, equip students with skills that they can actually use in the real world.
Skills that go beyond the classroom.
Right. And all of this has some pretty significant implications for how we approach teaching, especially in higher education. What are some of the takeaways for educators here? I think one of the most important roles of college-level teaching is to help students understand the epistemology of their discipline. Like, what counts as knowledge in this field? How is knowledge created and validated? What are the rules of the game?
Introduce them to the culture of that discipline.
Exactly. And the article gives this example of teaching educational psychology to students from all different backgrounds. Some come from the humanities, some from the sciences, and they all have different assumptions about what constitutes valid knowledge.
Different starting points.
Right. And the instructor has to bridge those gaps, help them understand each other's perspectives. And it raises a really interesting question. If someone develops a more sophisticated understanding of, like, how knowledge works in one subject, does that transfer to other areas of their life? Does it make them a better thinker overall?
It's a great question.
Yeah, and the article suggests that it might. But we need more research to say for sure. And it also touches on how, like, the rise of postmodernism has influenced college students.
Oh, interesting. In what way?
Well, a lot of students today are very familiar with the idea that, knowledge is socially constructed, that there are multiple perspectives, and they can all be valid.
Relativism.
Right. And that's not a bad thing, necessarily. But the challenge for educators is to help students move beyond simply accepting everything as equally valid. To help them develop those critical thinking skills, to be able to evaluate different claims, to construct solid arguments based on evidence and reasoning.
To be able to discern between, like, a well-supported argument and one that's just based on opinion.
Exactly. And finally, the article discusses this idea of making students more aware of their own epistemic beliefs, like getting them to reflect on their own assumptions about knowledge.
Self-reflection.
Yeah. And while that's certainly valuable, the article suggests that it might be even more effective to really expose students to the epistemological assumptions of their discipline. Like, how do experts in this field think about knowledge? What do they consider good evidence? How do they build their arguments? Because ultimately, the goal is to align students' beliefs with the practices of the discipline.
To help them think like experts.
Exactly. So the big takeaway here is that, our beliefs about knowledge aren't static. They're not fixed. They change depending on the subject matter, the context, our level of expertise. And understanding this dynamic nature of epistemic beliefs is crucial.
It's about being aware of the different ways of knowing, the different rules of the game.
Right. And, the debate about whether our understanding of knowledge is general or specific, it's kind of in the past now. The focus now is on understanding the complex interplay between those two ideas and how we can use that understanding to become better learners, better thinkers, and better navigators of information in all aspects of our lives.
That's a great way to put it. And this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. So for you, our listener, here's something to ponder. Think about a topic that you find really challenging to understand right now. Could it be that you're struggling because the underlying assumptions about knowledge in that field, the way they define evidence, the methods they use, maybe that's just very different from what you're used to? And could understanding those underlying assumptions actually change how you approach learning that topic? Food for thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating area of epistemic beliefs. It's a journey well worth taking.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.